Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game and is so packed this week we don't even have time to mention that we've just passed over 2 million downloads. I'm Kevin Day and he's Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Such a shame, Kieran, that we don't have time to discuss those 2 million downloads or indeed producer Guy's shifty response when we asked what that might mean financially.
Yeah, but the time you filter out my Irish cousins and your Irish cousins, I'm not sure how many of the 2 million will be left, Kevin.
Oh, that's a fair point. Yeah, you've taken the gloss off it a little bit there. It's amazing with all producer Guy's money, you'd think he could afford a phone line that didn't keep cutting out when we mentioned wages. Later, we'll be having a brief chat with Rob Angus, who's from the Swindon Supporters Trust, about the saga unfolding down there. But it's questions day, Kieran. And boy, do we have questions, plus a couple of essays and an autobiography. In which, in true ITV primetime Nicky Chapman style, we may have some long-lost relations for you to talk about. Our first question, though, Kieran, comes from Brian O'Connor. And Brian O'Connor asks, how many non-playing staff does the average Premier League team have? So let's say Brighton, Kieran, their average. And what is the wage bill for non-playing staff? So from coaches, medical staff, marketing, media, etc., not forgetting the organic sourdough bakers at Brighton.
Very harsh, very harsh. It very much depends on a club-by-club basis. If we take one of the G6 clubs, such as Manchester United, Manchester United in total employ nearly 1,000 people. Until about 3 or 4 years ago, they were, in fact, the biggest private sector employer in Manchester. Still can't pay their staff the real living wage in Manchester, sadly. But from the Glazers, what do you expect? And Ed Woodward, their focus is on the bottom line as always. Of those nearly 1,000 staff, 115 are players and 176 are down as coaches and technical. So that's going to be the medical staff and so on. Manchester United's wage bill in a normal year will be in excess of £300 million, of which around about 80% you'd normally allocate to the players. But it does start to get a little bit mixed when you then try to compare directly to other clubs, because Manchester United, for example, have £20 million a season down as match day costs. So stewarding, security, catering, some of those activities are actually farmed out to other people. Whereas if you take a look at West Ham say that they've got 250 part-time staff on match days who are likely to be directly employed. So comparing like to like is challenging. Even when you drop down the divisions, if we take a club such as Tranmere, which does such a fantastic job for the local community in the Wirral, they've got nearly 300 part-time staff who are sort of running projects as well as helping out on match days. But the general split, and I've spoken to people at one or two clubs, is that they say broadly 80% is going on the playing side of activities.
Our next question comes from Simon, just Simon. And Simon says, as football restarted, Premier League clubs replaced actual fans with pictures of fans and support-type banners. Now clubs like Chelsea have big advertising banners as well, promoting Three, Singer, Nike, etc. Any evidence that they're receiving bigger advertising income as a result?
I don't think so. What's likely to be the case is that the senior commercial partners of clubs will say, we signed up for football taking place in front of full stadiums, and we wanted our products to be associated with the stadium and the atmosphere. That living, breathing organism that makes football so much different. And we're getting a bit of a raw deal when it's just static adverts in front of nothing. So can you give us something else for our money? And I strongly suspect that the additional big banners that we are seeing are effectively a compensation by the football clubs to some of their senior partners who say, well, aren't we entitled to a bit of a refund? We're not really getting what we signed up for. That could be the case. I mean, some clubs might be getting a little bit extra, but I would be surprised. Manchester United, for example, they've actually put those big banners over the seats because the manager complained that the players couldn't see each other on the pitch because all they could see was a bunch of red plastic, which is unusual for Old Trafford, of course.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I suspect Palace removed some of theirs because the silent fans looked a bit judgmental, sitting through what they had to sit through. Now, our next question, Kieran, this is the one where you might have to strap yourself in and follow a bit of a journey. It comes from Neil Penfold. Penfold was actually on my short list of names when Ed was born, as I was because I was a Danger Mouse fan. I thought Penfold,
a great character.
I thought Penfold Day would be a great name. My first choice was Zippity Doodah because I thought what a brilliant name Zippity Doodah Day would have been. But as I say, that was my list, not the official list, which is why he's called Ed. Now, Neil's question. This is where you need to pay attention. Neil's question is related to Malaga, who are now mid-table in the second tier. Says Neil. Neil says, I follow Malaga after my Uncle Terry, then living nearby on the Costa del Sol, took me to a home game 12 years ago. If that's true, then this pod has taken an intriguing turn. It really has. Neil says Malaga have had huge financial problems after being in the Champions League, and their Qatari owner, Sheikh Abdullah Al Thani, a prime candidate for Rongan, he says, and his sons were removed by a Spanish court and replaced by a judicial administrator. Al Thani was accused of taking $8.5 million out of the club. So Neil asks, quite logically, when is it illegal for owners to withdraw money from their own club? And Al Thani claims to still own the club and wants €80 million for it, €80 million for it. So why can't the administrator just sell the club to a new owner?
Well, this is part actually of an ongoing investigation into, and let me give his full name, Abdullah bin Nasser bin Abdullah Al Ahmed Al Thani, or Dave to his mates. And he's still active on Twitter. I did check his account this morning. He bought Malaga in 2010, and apparently at the same time, he was being linked with buying Liverpool. And as much as I loathe FSG and their greed is good mentality, I wouldn't wish Al Thani on anybody. He did sort of back the manager for the initial years, and under Manuel Pellegrini, they got as far as the Champions League quarter-final in 2013. So, Malaga did appear to push on, and then things all went wrong in injury time in the quarter-final against Dortmund when Dortmund scored two controversial goals, and since then the squad's been sold, it's been broken up. They've got the second highest net income from player sales in La Liga, I think, since that date. And the finances have deteriorated. Now, in terms of this, I think it's $10 million that Al Thani is supposed to have removed from the club. There is a court investigation. There is a municipal administrator now effectively running the affairs of the club. But until the court case is finished, the administrator, is my understanding, would not be in a position to relinquish Al Thani from his role at the club and force through a sale to another person. So it's a case of wait and see. But as wrong-uns go, well, anybody that's got an Uncle Terry living in the Costa will know that there's more to this than meets the eye, and as long as nobody from the old Bills coming across to Spain, that's the way that everybody's happy they are.
Yeah, this is definitely not one of Uncle Terry's aliases, is it, Al Thani? Are you sure?
No, I don't think so.
But it's a valid question. I mean, if he's ostensibly taking his own money out of the club, why does that become a matter for investigation?
You've got to look at the reason. If it was an initial loan to the club, which has been repaid, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Right.
If it was shares, you cannot get your money back from shares from the club itself. So you'd have to sell the shares to somebody else. We then go into the realms of, well, what else could he use as a vehicle to withdraw money from the club? He could pay himself a salary, but there appears to be no evidence of that. Or he could take the route that was taken down by cuddly Ken Anderson at Bolton Wanderers. Ken Anderson said, "I never took a penny in wages."
Yeah.
When he almost took that club to its knees, well, it did take that club to its knees, nearly destroyed it. But upon further investigation, he took out £625,000 as a consultancy fee. So there's lots of vehicles through which you can extract money from clubs. If that is to the detriment of the club's creditors, then potentially that could be a breach of company law, and therefore that might explain why the Spanish legal authorities have decided to investigate further.
Okay. Sebastian R. Fat is a friend of the show and a special friend of Kieran's after sending in this accounting question. Sebastian says that several sports-related special purpose acquisition companies, SPACs, have emerged in the USA recently, with several looking at professional football clubs as targets. So, for example, Red Bull Acquisition Corp, which has raised $575 million, down to Bullhorn Holdings with $75 million. Do you think smaller SPACs could spill into the lower English leagues, and could it work for them and the football clubs they acquire?
Right. For people not familiar with SPACs, these are known as blank check companies or blank check investment vehicles. And what they do is that they go onto a stock exchange and they say to people, give us some money. They say to investors, give us some money, but we're not going to tell you what we're going to do with that money. Oh. But what they aim to do is to get somebody who is perhaps connected with a particular industry. So that could be tech, it could be entertainment, it could be sport, as sort of one of the lead people at the SPAC. And then what they have to do is, normally within sort of 18 to 24 months, they need to identify an organisation into which they can invest. And then they buy that company. That company, therefore, that football club potentially is listed on the stock exchange through this SPAC. And then the shares can be sold, and if it's been a good investment, then people can make a profit. They are very popular in the US, though it does appear to be a bit of a fad, which is starting to fizzle out. But the reason why there's so much money in the States is that with interest rates so low, what do people do with their spare cash? They start to speculate with it. That's why we're seeing the huge spikes in prices of Bitcoin and other relatively speculative assets. So it's intriguing. Could they therefore go and take a punt on a club in the Championship, or even with these figures, a non-Big Six club in the Premier League? Certainly, one of these was at one stage being linked with Liverpool. So there's certainly the opportunity for this to happen. It's just that these particular latest acronyms do appear to have lost their luster over the course of the last 6 months, because there's so many of them around. People are saying, well, you've got 200 companies effectively saying, we're going to invest in something, but we've not got a clue what we're going to invest in just yet. And therefore, are they actually ever going to make proper profits?
So how does this work then in practice, Kieran? So Red Bull Acquisition Corp, and Sebastian, I have to say, gave us lots of examples, but just for time, I cut it down to two. So Red Bull Acquisition Corp approach me and say, if you give us $1 million, we guarantee you a return. And I say, you've come to the wrong person. Try Producer Guy. And they go to Producer Guy and say, you give us 10 minutes. And what do? Do they say, look, once we've reached a threshold of $500 million, we then invest? Or do they just have a time period and then invest all the money that they have raised? And if they don't invest in it, are they then arrested for scamming you?
Right. The way that it works is that they will normally sell shares in the SPAC for $10. That's sort of the day. So they're trying to attract lots of small investors who want to make a bit of money. After they've got, say, 100 or 200 million bucks from them, they then say, right, thanks very much for the money. We are now going to take your money and we're going to stick it into a secure account. So they can't run off with the money. There are checks and balances on that. And they've then got, in general, 18 to 24 months to identify a target. So after getting the money, they then say, right, okay, we're now trying to do something with your money. The people in charge normally charge a 2% commission on this, and they identify the target, and they go back to the shareholders and say, right, we want to buy Liverpool or Palace or Brighton or Leeds or West Brom or whatever it's going to be. We've got enough money to do it. It's your opportunity now to say yes or no. And if the shareholders all turn around and say, oh, actually, I think that's a bit of a bobbins investment, then effectively the SPAC will delist and they'll get the majority of their money back.
Okay. And in the meantime, all that money is making lots of lovely interest for somebody, is it?
Well, the trouble is, there is no interest at present, is there? The interest rates globally are very, very low.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
There's not, and the reason why these vehicles are popular is because if you think about it, as an investor, you've got two choices. You can put your money in shares, or you can put your money into a savings account. If you stick your money into a savings account, the interest rates are so low that there's no incentive to do that. So that's why they're starting to go into slightly more risky equity opportunities.
Okay, I got you. Dave Moore is a Sunderland fan. And Dave Moore says, following the takeover of Sunderland by Kirill Louis Dreyfus, can you help me understand what Stuart Donald and his Madrox friends did with our club, from the £9 million loan secured against the club to the £20.5 million debt from Madrox being written off as an exceptional operating expense, plus other things? Should Donald be on the good step or the naughty step after all this?
Right. Sunderland effectively a good 10 years in the Premier League between 2008 and 17 in terms of being a club there. However, if you delve into their finances, although that they were in the Premier League, they were losing on average £450,000 a week.
A week?
A week. Wow. Yeah. So the owner, Ellis Short, I hate to say this, he appeared to be a rather naive billionaire. And he, which is a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
They're the worst sort, aren't they? Those naive billionaires.
Yeah. And he put his faith in terms of the day-to-day running of the club in the hands of a series of chief executives, all of whom did extremely well out of Sunderland. If you take a look at Sunderland's highest paid director during that period, which peaked at £2.4 million for a single season. And there were a lot of people that did pretty well. They got through a series of managers. Clearly, there was the Adam Johnson issue. The club went from one public relations crisis to another. And eventually, Ellis Short reached the stage whereby he says, I'm a naive billionaire. I'm getting out.
Is there some kind of naive billionaires anonymous that he turns up and says?
Well, I don't think there'd be many people there, to be fair, but
just him and Guy,
yeah. So when he left Sunderland, he was owed around about £150 million. A lot of that money he wrote off. He sold the club to Stuart Donald, and for those not familiar with Stuart Donald used to own Eastleigh Football Club. I think he then owned 10% of Oxford United, but in order to buy into Sunderland, he sold those interests. He had a wife and 4 children, and then he met a lap dancer in a strip club, and he didn't have a wife and 4 children anymore as such. But that's another story. And he acquired Sunderland, and Yeah, initially it looked like he certainly said all the right things, and a bit like Mike Ashley, another person associated with the club in the Northeast. He was seen, he was engaging with fans, he was appearing on podcasts, he was doing, from a public relations perspective, it looked quite good. But Sunderland then dropped from the Championship into League One. There was the Sunderland Till I Die documentary where he didn't come out of it too well, and the relationship turned toxic. Now, his company, which he owned with Charlie Methven and some unusual Uruguayan politician, Madrox, that was being used to effectively acquire the club from Ellis Short. And it appeared to be sort of using the parachute payments as a means of paying off Ellis Short. Now, the ethics and the morality of that is you need to park elsewhere, but it's certainly legal. And then in the 2019 accounts, there was a strange bit of disclosure where it appeared as if this company, Madrox, owed Sunderland £20 million, and Sunderland said, don't worry about that, lads, we'll write it off.
Right.
So that's what I think piqued the ire of many Sunderland fans, along with the fact that Stuart Donald, he became a bit of a laughing stock, and therefore you felt by association as a Sunderland fan, this wasn't reflecting well on the club. Sunderland fans, you and I have both been there, both been to Roker Park and the Stadium of Light, and it's a great place to visit as an away fan. Passionate fans, they don't like to be made to look foolish, and I think that Stuart Donald has made them look foolish. So, on which step is he on? I think when he bought the club, his intentions were probably good, although I suspect his intentions were to try to make some money out of the club from running it for a couple of years and selling it on at a profit. He sold it to Louis Dreyfus, where it looks as if they've now got a bit more stability. So it's a bit like it's a bit like a dodgy one night stand. You're just trying to wipe it off the memory banks, and I think that's how Sunderland fans would like to go forward in terms of their relationship with Stuart Donald.
This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels and is now available in the USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand and the EU, so we can all be tidy together, Kieran.
Yes. And did you know that every hour somebody's diagnosed with testicular cancer? So this is a reminder to all of the men listening to check yourself before you wreck yourself. To help reduce that figure, Manscaped has partnered with the Testicular Cancer Society to spread awareness for men's health and early cancer detection as part of their We Save Balls initiative. So whilst you're down there cleaning up your sack, why not go down and give them a little investigation for lumps, changes in size or any pain? And if you feel out of the ordinary, give your doctor a call.
You can get 20% off and free shipping with code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with code PRICEOFFOOTBALL, all in capitals, at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you. Is there a subject that you can't analyse to a dodgy one-night stand, Kieran? Because it seems to be your go-to analogy at the moment. It really worries me. Do you know what occurs to me about that story, apart from the relief that the lap dancer is in somebody else's bit of it, is this, until I started doing this pod, this illustrates exactly the disassociation between football fans and football finance. Because when I was doing Match of the Day 2, I probably did Sunderland as much as any other club. And I used to really look forward to going up to the Stadium of Light to film up there. It was always a brilliant place to go, always a really, really welcoming, friendly place to go. And yet all this stuff at a higher level was going on that I didn't know about and fans didn't know about. And I sometimes wonder whether I wouldn't have been happier left in blissful ignorance. But that really illustrates the gap between the people working at the lower end of the club and the fans and the people at the other end. I mean, because like, you touched on Charlie Method. I mean, he basically sneered at the people of the North East for the whole time he was there, didn't he? It's just,
I mean, his comments that people in the North East, they don't understand finance, so therefore they shouldn't bother themselves. It's this very disturbingly patronising public school mentality. Just because we're from a different background, that's all it means. We're just from a different. It doesn't automatically make us stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also they do understand finance. They understand trying to make 50 quid a week last to feed the family. A lot of them. But Neil Kimpton. Now, this is an interesting one, Kieran. Neil Kimpton said in December, despite the valiant efforts of volunteer fans, Harrogate Town's game against Carlisle was called off 10 minutes into the actual match. When this happens, do clubs have to just swallow the costs involved, floodlights, staff costs, travel, etc., or is there some kind of central fund? And do the teams have any influence on the decision, or is it solely the referees? Now, I can answer that bit, the referees bit, because technically, absolutely solely the referee's decision based on the health, safety and welfare of the players. But I asked an actual referee and it all got a bit complicated in ways that I don't think we should go into on this show, Kieran, basically. So let's ignore that bit and say technically within the letter of the law, they have no influence whatsoever on the decision, none whatsoever, none. And you can read between however many lines you want on that one. But in terms of the cost to Harrogate Town, I mean, it's a fair question because it's an act of God, isn't it? It's a snowstorm that's happening 10 minutes into a game and it's costing them a lot of money in an already cash-strapped season.
It is, but ultimately the home team is responsible for hosting the match. And if a game is postponed or abandoned, to make things worse, the home team is responsible for the costs of the away team.
Oh.
So that can be train fares up to £100 per person or coach costs up to $2,400 for up to 24 employees. And if the club, if it's an early kickoff, if it's then potentially you might have to go and pay for the hotel accommodation for the previous night as well. So it can be a bit of double jeopardy. But they won't get anything back in terms of the costs to the home team. I mean, we're talking to Rob from Swindon a bit later on, and I can remember, I think it was about 1977, going to Swindon, and they were 4-0 up after 64 minutes, and the heavens opened, and the referee abandoned the game. So they would have had as bad as it gets from them, and I think in the replayed game we scabbed a 1-0 victory just to make things worse. Wow. So unfortunately, the home team is the one that has to suck up all those costs.
I did not know that they had to suck up the away costs as well, which might be one of the reasons where referees are encouraged to call a game off as early as possible, aren't they? Encouraged, I say, because it's all down to the health and safety of the players, etc. But yes, I suppose it makes sense if you've got Carlisle coming down, you might as well tell them 8 hours before they arrive that the game's likely to be off, as an hour before. But referee's decision solely. Now, Dennis O'Connor. There's another O'Connor. Dennis O'Connor. I'm chuckling.
D. O'Connor.
D. O'Connor. Have I missed something there, Kieran? Is this something in Line of Duty that I don't?
No. No.
Okay.
I believe there was somebody from Line of Duty on the programme to which you contribute.
Indeed, Adrian Dunbar. And have I got news for you? And thank God there was no audience. I've friends of mine, middle-aged friends, normally placid, calm individuals, losing their shit when I told them Adrian Dunbar was hosting. Have I got news for you? That's just really
rightly so. The man is closest thing to God on the planet at present.
Yeah, you know he's acting, Kieran, don't you?
No, that's real.
It's not a documentary. Dennis O'Connor says, this made me chuckle the way Dennis put this. Dennis O'Connor says, I do enjoy listening to your podcast. It's almost like he's weighed up the options there and decided to plump for, yes, I do enjoy it. But hello, who's that at the door this time of the day?
It's Next Door, who have just returned from Turkey, and I think they're dropping off some Turkish delight.
Holy mother of God!
That is Ted Hastings, isn't it?
Well, just to go with the 70s doorbell, and it's the next door neighbours have just popped back from Turkey with some Turkish delight.
They can't come near us, of course, because they're self-isolating.
Well, they're not that self-isolating. They've just rang a doorbell. Jeez. Anyway, Dennis says, I do enjoy listening to your podcast, and as a chartered accountant, I'm very familiar with your favourite accounting topics of amortisation and impairment. Impairment? Well, I know I go to a happy place sometimes, Kieran, when you're talking about things. Have we talked about impairment? Well,
Impairment's when you sign somebody shite and you realise he's shite.
Oh, impairment. That's what it is.
That's what impairment is. Yeah.
I shall tell my palace supporting mates that there's a name for it. Dennis says, I have a question on how clubs account for image rights. Simply put, I'm going to be the judge of that, Dennis. Simply put, do they capitalise the value of the image rights for a player that they pay the player's promotional company or his previous club and amortise the contract value over the length of the deal? Or... there's an or. Do they expense the image rights payment to the player or his company through the profit and loss account when such payments are made?
Right, I'll let you go make a cup of tea now, shall I? Whilst I answer this.
You may need to re-put the question because I'm not 100% certain I've even read it correctly, let alone understand the answer.
Okay, when a player is signed by one club from another, you pay a compensation fee for his registration certificate. Now, we call that a transfer fee.
Right.
And that is amortised. When it then comes to negotiations with the player, let's say that you're approached by another quiz show, Kevin, and they say, here it is, Kevin, we're going to pay you £10,000 an episode. And you'll say, well, hold on. I'll end up paying a lot of tax on that. Can we work this out a different way? How about...
No, I would just take the 10,000 quid, Kieran.
Right,
Seriously, there's no point continuing this negotiation. I'm ushering my agent out of the room saying, did they genuinely say £10,000? Sign it.
They say, well, hold on. What we'll do is that we will pay you £8,000 an episode, and we will pay you in addition £2,000 an episode for your image rights. Perhaps your signature on the when the show's opening credits come up and things of that nature. And that £2,000 a week doesn't go to you directly, but it goes to this company. And instead of you paying 45% tax on all 10,000, you pay 45% tax on your earnings, and your image rights company pays 19% tax on the money received by the image rights company. And then a few years later, let's say that TV show is no longer available, you then start to extract the money from the image rights company, but you'll end up paying a lower rate of tax on that. So right. That's the way that it would operate. So it's all to do with tax planning. Now, HMRC... they normally say we won't allow people to have more than 20% of their pay in the form of image rights. And the reason why there are a number of, there's a number of outstanding investigations by HMRC is that historically some players and agents and clubs have taken the mickey a bit and have tried to say, well, this fullback that we've signed for Romania, he's taking 40% or 50% of his money through his image rights company, and HMRC have said that's just a scam. So that's the way that it works. It would normally be treated as part of remuneration. It wouldn't be capitalised. The interesting thing from my point of view, and this is only because I'm a nerd, whether the image rights costs are actually included as part of wages or whether they are shown elsewhere as just sundry expenses. Because this could mean that if a lot of money that is actually going to players is not being shown as wages, then the wages bills of Premier League football clubs could be significantly understating the true cost of employing those players, because only the physical wages paid to them would be shown within that heading, and the rest would just be subsumed elsewhere, which I appreciate has got no interest to anybody apart from me.
No, it probably has. We've had 2 million downloads, Kieran. We wouldn't have kept all of those if they weren't interested a little bit, I'm guessing. That 19% figure, Kieran, that just happens to be the tax rate for image rights, does it? Because it is a huge...
That's the tax rate on companies. So what you would do, you would set up Kevin Day Image Limited.
Yeah. And
Kevin Day Image Limited would invoice the football club each month 20% of the overall package that you or your agent had negotiated.
That would have... Imagine the confusion for those American investors giving $10 to an SPAC when they get a letter saying, we're thinking of putting 500 million quid into Kevin Day Image Rights Limited. And they say, this handwriting looks familiar. 2 more questions before our interview. Sam Woodruff. And this is one of those questions I like because it seems simple, but I'm surprised no one's asked it before, really. But Sam Woodruff said Arsenal approached Norwich to buy Emi Buendia in the January transfer window, and apparently Norwich asked for £40 million, but instead Arsenal offered money plus players. Which scenario would have been better for Norwich in regards to money made and FFP?
Well, if you have player swaps, there is scope, and I'm not saying this would ever happen, to start manipulating the numbers. So if Norwich wanted to report a big profit on the sale of Buendia, and I think Arsenal were supposedly offering Willock or Reece Nelson, or perhaps both of them, right. What they could have done, they could have said, well, we're actually going to value Buendia at 60 million, and Arsenal say, well, we will value Willock and Reece Nelson together at 60 million, and therefore both clubs report a big profit on the deal in the year of sale. So that would certainly help both parties towards financial fair play. And if you look at some of the deals which perhaps have raised eyebrows in recent years, we've got the Alexis Sanchez and Mkhitaryan swap between Manchester United and Arsenal. Both clubs had players who, for whatever reason, things weren't working out, and they managed to show a profit there. If we go back to Barcelona and Juventus, Barcelona had a midfielder called Arthur, a Brazilian midfielder, decent player, not outstanding. Juve had a 30-year-old, I think he's Serbian, midfield player called Pjanic, and they're decent players. And what surprised people was that in the player swap, Arthur was valued at €80 million, and I think Pjanic was valued at 65. Whereas, most people would have said those numbers look quite high. So, of course, this allowed both clubs to report a significant profit, which meant that when they went to financial fair play, which is, of course, profit-based, both clubs in that particular year were less close to the limit than perhaps they otherwise would have been had the players been sold independently at perhaps values which the rest of the market thought was appropriate.
One more question before our interview, and this is my favourite question, Kieran. You'll find out why in a moment. It comes from Harry Haskett, and Harry says, when does cup prize money get paid to clubs? Is it paid per round or as a lump sum at the end of the season? See, that's my favourite question, Kieran. It's 2 lines at most. I could have taken the second part out of that question, and it would have been 1 line. Seriously, my routine is I start the 12:30 kickoff on a Saturday. I start writing my script out. I'm normally done by half time. I was into Newcastle was scoring a 3rd goal as I finished yesterday. It's astonishing, kid.
I was swearing when they scored that 3rd goal as well.
I imagine you were, and I imagine you were probably cheering when your ex-goalkeeper helped Arsenal equalise just a moment ago.
Yes, good old Matty.
But this is a good question. So when does the cup prize money get paid to clubs?
Right, I've taken a look at FA regulations, and it doesn't appear to be anything specific. But the logic would have to be that it would be paid at the end of the season. If we take a look at UEFA, what UEFA do is they work out pots of money, which is distributed to individual clubs. Now, if we take the Champions League, the way that it works is that you get €2.7 million for a win, €900,000 for a draw in the group stages, and then you get certain amounts per victory afterwards. But in addition to that, there are other pots, other pools of money, which are allocated to clubs on a percentage basis. Now, if we take last season, for example, the season was curtailed as a result of COVID. So therefore, UEFA don't actually know how much money they have to distribute to clubs until the season is over, because they might have to get rebates might have to give rebates to individual broadcasters. It could be that there are certain payments to UEFA from broadcasters which are linked to the number of viewers for matches. And therefore, as there is not a fixed amount of money to distribute, you have to work out how much money did we bring in, and then you say, well, 3% goes to this pot, 6% goes to this pot, and so on. When it comes to the FA and its prize money, it could be that the money is paid out a wee bit earlier. But again, from the FA's perspective, what would have happened last season if the government had said there is going to be no restart, football will not be allowed to continue, and effectively the FA Cup is abandoned at the end of the fifth round? Because the broadcasters would turn around and say, we want a huge rebate. And the FA would then say, well, we've already given the money out to the clubs. We can't afford to give you a rebate. So for that reason, I suspect there will be a delay to the end of the season so that everybody knows just how much money there is to allocate to individual clubs. Now, the FA Cup prize money, it is fixed amounts. There are no variables. But what we've seen, of course, in 2021 is that the prize money has been halved compared to last year on the back of COVID.
I'm glad to hear you say it is a fixed amount, because that was going to be my next question. Because part of the narrative of the FA Cup, certainly in the first, second and third round, is how much money a club like Marine, for example, will get by battling their way through. And we know that it could save them for several seasons. So it'd be very annoying for a club at that level to suddenly feel...
Sorry about
that. What else did they bring back from Turkey?
A bit of Killing Joke, never harmed anybody.
Yeah, I can't carry on with this train of thought now, Kieran. But so a club like Marine can rest assured that they will be getting the money that they think they will be getting.
Yes.
Great. Okay, that's all I need to say. All right. Now, this is all crashing around about our ears, Kieran, question-wise, what with the next door neighbours and Killing Joke. So luckily it's interview time. There's almost an element of sitcom about the goings on at Swindon Town, except that no one is laughing. So we thought that we would talk to Rob Angus of the Swindon Town Supporters Trust to see if we could make some sense of these shenanigans, is the only word we can use. But because I suspect that Rob was going to be full of righteous anger, I thought it might help, Kieran, if you could give us the briefest of upsums about the charges that the FA brought against Swindon Town this week.
Okay, so to try to summarise it, Swindon Town has for many years been controlled by a guy called Lee Power, who has had historic relationships with the game. I think he was an agent at one point. Yeah. And then in 2013, he apparently had some form of meeting with a guy called Michael Standing. Michael Standing is an intermediary, or what we've more commonly known as an agent. He was Gareth Barry's agent. And in fact, both Michael Standing and Gareth Barry signed for Aston Villa from Brighton in the late 1990s. And that's how they first had the relationship. Clearly, Gareth Barry went on to have a fairly stellar career, and Michael Standing had a solid career as a professional footballer. But then I think he retired earlier than Gareth and focused on his agents. There was then, at the result of this meeting, it had to be done with an oral contract. An oral contract is still upholdable in law because neither players nor agents can own more than 10% of a club. And the deal was apparently that for £800,000, Lee Power would give half of the profits from the sale of Swindon Town to the person that gave him the £800,000. Michael Standing said in court a few years later, that money came from me, and Lee Power said, no, it didn't. It came from Gareth Barry. So there's outstanding confusion in respect of that. Lee Power has also been trying to sell the club more recently, and other people have come in and said, well, you can't do that because we own some of Swindon Town as well, and that's where it's got all messy. And therefore the FA have charged the football club, Lee Power, Gareth Barry, I think, I'm not certain, Michael Standing, and First Touch Pro Management, which is Michael Standing's company, which he set up 5 or 6 years ago, but he mysteriously resigned as a director last Thursday with breaches of the rules in terms of intermediaries and players owning shares of a company. So I tried to keep it as quickly as I could, but and that is quick compared to the pages and pages I had to wade through.
It is, yeah. I might ask Rob this because I've got a feeling that Gareth Barry himself hasn't been charged, and I suspect producer Guy would like me to say that. That is the context, and I can assure people listening to this that is in about as much of a nutshell as anybody else would get it. So that's the context to the interview we had with Rob Angus of the Swindon Town Supporters Club. Rob, thank you very much for joining us. Kieran has just given us a brief description, as brief as possible, of what's happening down there at Swindon. So before we start, I thought I just want to remind you, Rob, that the laws of libel and slander do count on podcasts. All right, we're all in enough trouble as it is without getting into more trouble, and that's in no way connected to the fact that the first question I'm going to ask you about is about Lee Power. Now, it's quite clear, Rob, that the relationship between Lee and the Swindon fans is now toxic. Was it always the case?
It's not always been the case, Kevin. I think it started off the bat of a legal battle between Jed McCrory and Lee Power as to who owned the club, and Lee Power came through that. And I think people had an open mind. We then didn't have any transparency in the engagement we were looking to do. So we at the Supporters Trust were working out what to do. And we looked to try and buy the county ground, which is our stadium, which is owned by the council, as a positive move to sort of try and support the legacy of the football club. And so that the supporters had an asset that could help as and when, as a Swindon Town fan, ownership issues happen, because they tend to happen in our history quite a bit. And actually, when we put in an offer to buy the county ground to the council, Lee Power initially said he wasn't interested, but then he said he would like to buy it as an alternative. We got together with the council, and the council said, look, we'd rather a 50-50 deal between yourself and the club, so there aren't any issues if you fall out and they don't pay the rent, etc. So thanks to the input of a new shareholder who just come into the scene, Clem Morfuni, who's an Australian businessman who bought 15% of the club, we engaged on going into a joint venture with the football club and with Lee Power to buy the county ground. And then through Clem Morfuni, we had much better engagement with Lee Power up until the court, when the court details of the court case between Michael Standing and Lee Power and the Gareth Barry shenanigans came out last May. And just before that, we were about to buy the county ground with the club 50-50, agnostic of ownership. So it was an agreement that was going to last for hundreds of years for the supporters and for the football club to own the county ground and make sure that some of the rent that would come to the Supporters Trust would get invested back in to improve the stadium and make enhancements for supporters and improve a stadium which is quite dilapidated now. But unfortunately, with the details of the court case and the questions over the ownership of the club that arose from that, we've gone back to square one, really. And with on the 5th of February, Lee Power came out and said, look, I really, the club's on the brink. I can't make it beyond the end of February. And we called quite clearly for say, look, this is a serious situation. Come out and show us, the financials. We can support, we could help. We want a plan and a vision for the club. Tell us what the position is. And Lee hasn't responded to that open letter. We did say, look, we want to hear from Michael Standing. We want to hear from Clem Morfuni and anybody else who is supposed to be interested in taking on Swindon Town Football Club. And the only one to reply was Clem Morfuni, who said, I'm interested in buying the club. I've put an offer into Lee Power and I will provide financial transparency, openness, engage with the community and bring supporters onto the board. So we thought, that's great. And we continue to ask for others to come forward, but we haven't heard anything. And then a couple of weeks ago, we were made aware that Lee Power was looking to put Swindon Town into administration or sell it to an American firm supposedly called Able, who we can't find anything about. And again, we've requested that they come forward. And that was to lift an injunction which was put on Lee Power from selling the club or put into administration until the court case hearing as to whether Michael Standing owns 50% of the club or whether Lee Power owes Gareth Barry that money. So to support the plan to stop putting Lee Power being able to put the club into administration and encourage a sale to Clem Morfuni, who we've done good checks. He seems a good and solid businessman from Australia with a good vision for the club. We made a statement to say, look, this guy's come in, he's responded, he's got a plan, he seems willing to take the club on, he seems to have the financial backing, he's committing to financial transparency. We support that view. And after we made that statement into the hearing a week or so ago, Lee Power and the current ownership of the club have excommunicated the trust and said, we're not going to speak to you anymore because you've supported the openness and transparency that Clem Morfuni is promising.
You're the sort of guest I like, Rob, because you've answered probably the next 5 questions I'd planned to ask you.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's absolutely fine, because this is, as non-Swindon fans will understand listening to this, it's quite a difficult subject to grasp the details of, and you've done a brilliant job with that. Let me take you back to February when Lee Power announced the club was on the verge of bankruptcy. I never trust a club owner who makes himself manager at any stage. So he's always been a slightly odd character to me. But he's played both good cop and bad cop, because initially he painted himself as the good guy, saying it was only his money that was keeping the club out of bankruptcy and administration. And then recently he's used administration as a threat, hasn't he? So it's very difficult to kind of grasp whether or not he's acting in the best interests of the club or of himself.
It is very difficult, Kevin, because he even in February said I've been the one who's only ever funded the club. It's my money, and yet you've got a court case where his defence is, I've borrowed £4.5 million from Gareth Barry for this club, and Michael Standing doesn't own the equity. So he's saying something that's quite different to the court case. So it's very hard to believe, very hard to get true facts out. We haven't seen the accounts. The accounts that are out there are the abbreviated accounts, which, as you say on your show, really hard to sort of dig into. They were last. They go up to sort of May 19, and I think the next accounts are due by the end of May this year, but that will be only up to May 20. That doesn't really tell you what the current position of the club is, if it is on the brink. And hence we're saying we want proper full financial accounts. We'd like to see management accounts. As a trust, we are set up and we would be willing to crowdfund and support the club. But we want to know the position, and that the money would actually go to support the ongoing nature of the club, not into the pockets of an owner.
I've looked and I can't find any comment from Gareth Barry. Has he said anything at all? Is he keeping his head down? Is that for a reason?
No, well, I mean, he hasn't said anything at all. There's been no public statements that I've seen. I mean, we were quite surprised when the case came out. We're reading it through, and obviously Michael Standing's claiming he's got this verbal agreement with Lee Power and he owns half the club, and Lee Power's disputing it. And then Lee Power's defence is, you don't own half the club. I don't owe the money to you. It's a loan from Gareth Barry, and that was wow. Where did that come from? Yeah. It did sort of pick things together a bit, because we did have his nephew play for us for a little while, Brad Barry. Back in the sort of 2014, sort of 2015 sort of time of things. but no, he's not made his own sort of statement, and obviously that leads to the FA charges that have come up because if Michael Standing did fund the club, he wasn't able to because he was a football agent. So the FA have levied some charges on the club and Michael Standing and Lee Power. I guess there's legal action to defend those charges. We've been calling to the FA to say, look, if you do levy charges and you do find anybody guilty, punish the individuals, not the club.
Well,
because as Swindon fans in 1990, when we got to the top division for the first time under Ozzy Ardiles, we were under charges for irregular payments to players, and we got demoted down a division. And the only people that really hurt were the supporters and the local community. We want to avoid that from happening again.
Well, I'll bring Kieran here, because Kieran mentioned when we spoke about this last week that 1990 season. And once again, Kieran, it beggars belief that we're still talking about the fans being punished for the misdemeanors of people who own the club. And you know, I don't want to say anything that's going to get the pod into trouble, but whatever the motives for the way these people have behaved, it should be them that are punished, not the supporters of the club. And the club's in a bad enough situation on the pitch as it is, without fans having to suffer from this as well. It kind of beggars belief that it's people like Rob and the other fans that are going to get the punishment.
Yeah, I think it's the classic tin ear that we see from football authorities. They don't understand that the biggest stakeholders, the biggest investors in a football club are the fans, because they're the people that start watching and falling in love with Swindon Town at the age of 7 and carry that love with them to the day that they die. And to have the club sanctioned does indirectly impact upon the fans, but the authorities don't seem to see that particular link.
And it's, you know what I love about football, Rob, as well, is that there isn't a single football fan on your behalf who would think it would be right that you're punished. But also, I just love the fact this proves that every club has got links between. It's like you're looking now, because we're doing this on Zoom, which covers a bit of a surprise. I would have put a comb through my hair, but you can see a picture on my wall of Don Rogers, who was as big a hero for me as he was for Swindon. So again, it's one of those things that makes me think, this can't happen to Swindon because Don Rogers played for them. Let's go back to the FA charges, because I mean this has been dragging on for some time. When the FA, and it was a very stark announcement, it was very few words, literally saying that Lee Power, First Touch Pro Management and Michael Standing have been charged in relation to breaches of FA regulations on working with intermediaries. It's very stark, there's no detail. Did the charge come as a surprise to you, even though this has been rumbling on for a while?
I guess it didn't come as a surprise because the court case illustrated that there would be an issue here. The timing of it did, because the court case came out last May and the charges have only just arrived now. And the court case is not due for final hearing until I think the earliest will be December of this year, and it could run to next March. So the charges at some point we think were going to come, but we thought it might depend on the outcome of that court case. The fact that it's sort of come, before the court case is sort of settled was a bit surprising.
What would be the ideal outcome for you from all this? Would it be Mr. Power no longer being in charge of the club? Or are you not worried that he stays as long as there's clarity about what's happening?
I think now the outcome for us would be that Lee Power goes. We believe there's another hearing in the courts arguing about as to whether Lee Power can put the club into administration or sell it for £1 to these supposed American firm called Able, or whether he's encouraged by the court to sell to Clem Morfuni. Look, given the vision of openness and transparency and connecting with the community that Clem Morfuni has set out, and he's been involved with the club for about 5 years. He's been very open and engaging with the Supporters Trust since about 2017. Our best plan would be that Lee Power was encouraged by the court to sell to Clem Morfuni, who takes the clubs forward on the open and transparent agenda that he's promised publicly to the supporters and the people of Swindon broader community. So that would be the ideal outcome. I think it's very hard now to see how Lee Power could come back from this, given the damage that the lack of transparency and engagement has done over the last 6 months or so with the supporters.
Well, especially once he as you say, it publicly excommunicates the Swindon Town Supporters Trust, it's going to be very, very difficult to get that communication back. And this chap called Clem Morfuni, in my rudimentary research, he's obviously much more engaged with the club than I thought he was, because both Kieran and I thought he was just somebody who'd appeared recently and looked like a potential buyer, but it's clear that he has roots within the club already.
Yeah, he came on the scenes, I think, 5 years ago as a sponsor initially with his firm, which is a construction firm called Axis, and then he became a shareholder about a couple of years later, and he came to us to say, look, let's buy the county ground 50-50 together. I'll engage with the supporters, I'll work it through, and we have had really good engagement with him. But he started to fall out with Lee Power at the back end of 2019, I think, as we understand it, due to, and he was taking legal action separately last year over his shareholding, which he wasn't happy with the paperwork. He sold that outside of court, but he is still estranged, shall we say, from Lee Power. Hence, he is supporting Michael Standing in the legal action to try and force Lee Power to sell to him. But he's always engaged very openly with us, and as I say, the commitment to openness and transparency, and the commitment to invest in the club, develop the stadium, has been the thing we've been really looking for. So again, we are owner agnostic for the right owners who set out that vision, but the only one who seems to be willing to do that and talk publicly with us and set out a plan to take the club forward is Clem Morfuni at this stage.
Kieran, I've asked Rob what the ideal outcome would be. What's your instinct as to what the actual outcome will be on this?
I think there will be pressure on Lee Power to sell. Whether he will be given the option to determine the buyer is up to the court to decide in terms of the present ownership, because we don't know who actually owns Swindon Town. So until that issue is settled, we can't move on to the next stage.
Kieran, I've used this phrase already, I think twice in this interview, but it beggars belief that in the year 2021, in the English Football League, we're talking to a fan who doesn't know who owns his football club. How is that situation been allowed to develop when this has been going on since 2013?
Well, the EFL does have an owners and directors test, and it's as robust as it can be, but it does appear that there's been attempts to circumvent the rules, because by all accounts, the arrangement between Lee Power and AN was a verbal contract agreed separately, and there's no documentation to prove one way or the other. So I actually do have sympathy with the EFL.
Right. You've fallen into my trap there, Kieran, because I wanted it to be you that said there's an attempt to circumvent the rules here. So I thought for once it'd be nice if you got into trouble and not me and not Rob. But essentially that's what I was asking you, whether this is a deliberate attempt to circumvent the rules. Rob, it's been brilliant to talk to you. One final question. It must be so frustrating for you that there are no fans allowed in grounds at the moment, because that's where you could make your true feelings known around this issue. In the last few games, I mean, you probably would have sold out every home game, mainly with angry fans who wanted to make their voices known. There would have been also, both Guy and I know as Brighton fans and Palace fans, when the chips were down, fans from other clubs turned up at our games to show support and offer money. So it must be very frustrating that you're having to campaign almost in a vacuum.
It has been really frustrating, Kevin, and I think it probably has enabled Lee Power to carry on, longer than he has been able to, because that pressure hasn't been there, that visible pressure. We just need to now continue what we're doing, via social media, via media like this, and it's great, and really appreciate yourself and Kieran and Guy having me on here to make the case that this needs sorted out now, and we get a sustainable future for Swindon Town Football Club, which has been going since 1879.
Yeah, I mean it's a great old club with a great tradition, great stories about how it was founded. We wish you nothing but the best for the future. If there's anything else we can do for you, let us know. And of course, if it's a case, we'll keep following. I'm reluctant to say goodbye for two reasons. One, this is a really interesting interview. And two, I don't want to go back to watching the dullest FA Cup semi-final I've seen for a long time, basically. I'm hoping it will be 3-3 by the time I get back, but I doubt it. Rob, thank you so much for talking to us, and good luck with everything. And we hope it works out It sounds like the Clenmore Funi outcome is the best for Swindon Town, so fingers crossed that happens for you, mate.
Thank you.
I mean, Kieran, it's a mess, isn't it? But the one thing we all agree on, surely, apart from maybe from Lee Power, is that how can it possibly be that it will be the fans that suffer if there is, if these charges are upheld, and it could lead to points deduction. The club's already going down by the look of it, and the fans are the ones that eventually suffer from the mismanagement of people at the upper levels of the club.
Well, isn't that a microcosm of society in general, where the innocent pay for the crimes of the guilty?
Yes. Do you know, funny enough, your friend Adrian Dunbar from Line of Duty said something similar on Have I Got News for You? You're not the same person, Kieran. I've never seen you and Adrian Dunbar in the same room. Thanks
Mother
to,
of God, no.
Thank you to everyone who's become a patron of our pods via our Patreon site recently, including Richard Slevin and Tranmere Cat. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/Price of Football. If you don't want to make a small contribution, that's absolutely fine. It will still be free to air. And if you want to make a massive contribution, feel free. And if you have any questions for any aspect of football finance for Kieran, then it's questions@priceoffootball.com. And as ever, I will hand you over to Kieran Maguire from Line of Duty to say goodbye.
Well, thanks again for the reviews, folks. I'll keep this very quickly because I've been trying to eat a Madagascan vanilla double scoop ice cream throughout recording of this show, so it has been a challenge. And now it's reached the stage where the ice cream has melted and it's starting to drip out the bottom of the cone. But if you give us a review, great. Make those 5 stars. It's great. That helps producer Guy and the tables. Other than that, look after yourselves and big love and hugs to all.
You just played into every cliche that we have of Brighton fans, trying to juggle a Madagascar, not just a vanilla ice cream, a Madagascan vanilla ice cream. Well, never mind, you've got Turkish delight to go with it. Basically.
I know, yum yum.
Oh, that was a sinister sound. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.